Go ahead, I said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Cut the lock. The metallic snap came half a second later, sharp and clean, like a gunshot echoing through the still morning air, and the chain around my Jeep sagged loose as the bolt cutter jaws pulled away, sunlight catching the fresh silver bite in the steel, the kind of detail you don't forget once you've seen it up close. I could smell the faint tang of hot metal, feel the dry Texas heat already settling, and even though it wasn't past 8 a.m., and there she was, Laura Whitmore, standing in her pressed white blouse like she owned the entire cul-de-sac, one hand on her hip, the other gesturing toward my driveway like she was directing traffic on a highway she didn't build, her voice cutting through the quiet with that polished HOA authority. Tow it. Now. The driver hesitated for half a beat, just enough to tell me he wasn't comfortable, but not enough to stop, because people like Laura didn't leave room for hesitation, not when they believed they were right, not when they believed the rules bent around them like heat waves off asphalt. I stayed where I was, half in shadow, half in sunlight, watching it unfold like I'd already seen the ending, my boots still dusty from yesterday, my hands calm, no rush in my chest, no panic, just that steady, measured awareness that comes from knowing exactly how far someone is about to cross the line. She hadn't even looked at me yet. Not really. Not the way you look at someone you consider equal. Just a glance earlier when she'd walked up, saw me standing there, and decided I didn't matter enough to explain herself. Because in her world, I was just another homeowner with a violation notice, another problem to be corrected, another name on a list she controlled. The Jeep sat there between us, matte, black under the rising sun, dust along the fenders, tires still warm from the drive back last night. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just a vehicle that had done its job quietly for a long time. And I ran my thumb along the edge of the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood, grounding myself in the moment as the tow cable clinked against the frame, that hollow metallic sound, carrying further than it should in the morning silence. You were warned, Laura added, her tone softer now, almost sweet, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. And that was the thing about her. Everything sounded reasonable if you didn't listen too closely, if you didn't notice how every sentence ended with control. I took a slow breath, the air dry, carrying the faint smell of freshly cut grass from across the street, and finally stepped forward just enough for the light to hit my face, enough for her to see me clearly this time. But I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't move toward the Jeep or the driver or the broken lock lying on the concrete like a small, careless mistake already made. I just looked at her, then at the chain, then back at her again, and said, calm and even, "You might want to stop." She smiled, tight, confident, certain, and shook her head like she'd heard that line 100 times before, like she'd already decided how this story ended. And behind her, the tow truck engine idled low, a steady hum building under everything, like something waiting to be noticed, something she hadn't realized she'd already set in motion. And that was the moment I knew she wasn't going to listen. Not now. Not until it was too late. Not until the consequences showed up in a way she couldn't ignore. I had learned a long time ago that silence makes people reveal more than arguments ever will. And Laura Whitmore was already talking too much without realizing it. Her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she stepped closer to the Jeep, inspecting it like she was appraising something she already owned, her perfume drifting faintly in the warm air, sharp and expensive, trying to mask the underlying tension that sat just beneath her confidence. And I watched the tow operator adjust the hook, his hands slower now, more deliberate, like something in his instincts was telling him this job was not as simple as it looked. The broken lock lay on the concrete between us, catching the light, a small piece of metal that had just crossed a line most people never even saw, and I could not help but glance at it for a second longer than necessary. Because details like that always mattered later. Details like that always came back around when people least expected it. Laura followed my gaze and let out a short breath, almost a laugh, like she thought I was finally realizing I had lost. "You should have handled this when I sent the notice," she said, her voice calm, controlled, rehearsed, like she had said it 100 times before, and maybe she had. Because people in this neighborhood did not push back. Not really. They adjusted. They complied. They stayed quiet. And she had built her authority on that silence brick by brick. I shifted my weight slightly, gravel crunching under my boots, the sound loud enough to make the tow driver glance up again, and I met his eyes just for a second, long enough to let him see that I was not panicking, not arguing, not even trying to stop him. And that was the part that unsettled him. I could tell, because panic he understood, anger he understood, but calm like this did not fit the script. He had been handed. The Jeep itself looked ordinary if you did not know what you were looking at. Just another vehicle parked in a driveway in a neighborhood full of identical mailboxes and trimmed lawns. But I could see the subtle details even from where I stood. The slight modification in the antenna, the way the windows were tinted just enough to pass casual inspection, the faint outline of equipment mounted inside if the light hit at the right angle. Things that meant nothing to someone like Laura, but meant everything to the people who paid attention. She crossed her arms, watching the hook settle into place, satisfaction flickering across her face like she had just checked off another task on a long list. And for a moment, the only sound was the low idle of the truck and the distant hum of sprinklers starting up down the street, water ticking softly against dry grass. Completely unaware of the line that had just been crossed in the middle of an otherwise perfect morning, I took a slow breath, let it out evenly, and reached into my pocket. Not rushed, not dramatic, just a simple motion that felt heavier than it looked, my fingers brushing against my phone as I pulled it out, the screen lighting up in my hand. And I could feel Laura's attention shift slightly, curiosity slipping in where certainty had been, because now I was doing something. Now there was a response, and people like her always expected resistance to look loud, to sound emotional, to come with raised voices and desperate explanations. But I had none of that to offer. I scrolled once, found the number without looking twice, and held the phone loosely at my side for a second before bringing it up, the tow driver watching me now, fully watching, his movements slowing to a stop as if he was waiting for something he could not quite name, and I pressed the call button, lifting the phone to my ear as the line rang once, then connected, my voice steady, low, carrying just enough for both of them to hear. This is Hayes. We have a situation at my location, and I paused, listening, eyes drifting back to the Jeep, to the cable now resting against it, to the lock on the ground, every piece exactly where it needed to be, every detail already falling into place, before I added, just as calm as before. Yes, it involves the vehicle. The moment I said the word vehicle, everything shifted just a fraction, not enough for someone like Laura to notice, but enough for the tow driver to freeze mid-motion, his hand still resting on the control lever, as if he suddenly was not sure whether to pull it or let go. And I could hear the faint voice on the other end of the line, calm, precise, asking for confirmation, details, location, the kind of questions that came fast and clean, no wasted words, and I answered just as simply, giving the address, repeating the situation, my eyes never leaving the scene in front of me as the morning sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened across the driveway. Laura shifted her weight, arms still crossed, but now there was something else in her expression, a flicker of impatience creeping in where confidence had been solid a minute ago. Because the script was not playing out the way she expected, I was not arguing, not pleading, not even raising my voice, and that silence was starting to feel less like compliance and more like something she could not quite define. The sprinklers down the street clicked off one by one, leaving behind a damp smell of grass mixing with the dry heat, and the neighborhood settled into that quiet mid-morning rhythm where everything looked perfect on the surface, trimmed hedges, clean driveways, nothing out of place except the chain on the ground and the cable hooked to a Jeep that suddenly felt like the center of something much bigger than a simple HOA violation. I listened for a second longer, then gave a short acknowledgement into the phone, understood, before lowering it, not rushing to explain, not offering any extra information, just letting the silence stretch out between us again, because silence has weight when people are not expecting it. And now even the tow driver was fully watching me, his earlier hesitation turning into something closer to concern. Laura uncrossed her arms slowly, the movement controlled but tighter now, like she was recalibrating. If you are calling a lawyer, you are wasting your time, she said, her voice still steady but thinner at the edges, and I shook my head once. Not dismissive, just factual. Not a lawyer, I replied, letting the words land without elaboration, because explanation was not necessary yet. The driver finally spoke, his voice low, careful. Sir, Is there something I should know before I move this vehicle? And I met his eyes again, holding it just long enough to answer without saying too much. Yes, I said, then glanced at the Jeep, then back at him. But you will know soon enough. And that was when the first real crack showed. Not in Laura, not yet, but in the situation itself, because uncertainty had entered the space, and once it was there, it spread. A car door closed somewhere down the street, distant but clear, then another, the sound carrying through the quiet air, and I did not turn to look. I did not need to, because I already knew what came next. The timing, the sequence, the way things unfold when the right call reaches the right people, and Laura followed the sound instinctively, her head turning just slightly toward the road, her posture still firm but no longer effortless, as if something outside her control had just stepped into the edge of her carefully managed world. I bent down briefly and picked up the broken lock from the ground, feeling the weight of it in my hand, the clean cut through the metal, the evidence of a decision made without hesitation, and I turned it over once between my fingers before letting my gaze lift back to her, my voice quiet, even, almost conversational. You should have left this alone. And for the first time since she walked onto my driveway, she did not answer immediately. The sound came first, low and distant, not loud enough to alarm anyone who did not know what to listen for, but steady, deliberate, the kind of engine noise that does not belong to a casual drive through a quiet neighborhood. And I saw it register in the tow driver's face before it reached Laura, his eyes flicking past me toward the street, his hand slowly easing off the controls like he was no longer sure he should be touching anything at all. Laura turned a second later, slower, controlled. But there was a stiffness in the movement now, a slight hesitation that had not been there before, and I followed her gaze without moving my head, just shifting my eyes enough to catch the reflection of dark vehicles pulling to a stop along the curb. Clean lines, no markings, the kind that do not announce themselves but do not need to. The air felt different all of a sudden, heavier, like the moment right before a storm breaks, even when the sky is clear, and the hum of the tow truck engine seemed louder now, out of place against the quiet presence settling in from the street. One door opened, then another, the sound crisp, controlled, and footsteps followed, measured, not rushed, not uncertain, just precise. And that was the difference Laura felt even before she fully understood it. Because people who rely on authority can recognize real authority when it enters the room, even if they do not want to admit it. She turned back toward me, her expression tightening, searching for something in my face that would explain what was happening. But I gave her nothing, just the same calm look, the same steady posture, the broken lock still resting in my hand like a small, undeniable fact. The tow driver cleared his throat quietly, stepping back from the cable as if it might suddenly become something he should not be connected to, his boots scraping lightly against the pavement, and I could see the shift in him now, the realization settling in piece by piece. Not panic, not yet, but caution, the kind that comes when a job stops feeling routine. Footsteps approached behind Laura, stopping just short of the driveway, and a voice spoke, even, professional, carrying just enough authority to cut through everything else without needing to be loud. Sir, it said, directed at me, not her, and I inclined my head slightly in acknowledgement, not turning fully, because I already knew who it was, already knew why they were here. Laura followed the voice, her posture adjusting automatically, shoulders straightening, chin lifting, as if she could reassert control simply by standing a little taller. Is there a problem? She asked. And there it was again, that tone, practiced, confident. But now there was a thread running through it, something thinner, something less certain. I let a second pass before answering, just enough for the silence to stretch again, just enough for the weight of the moment to settle fully into place. And then I looked at the Jeep, at the cable still attached, at the chain on the ground, every detail exactly where it needed to be, and finally back at her, my voice low, steady. That depends on how far you want to take this. And behind her, I could feel the presence of the others now, not moving forward, not intervening yet, just there, waiting, letting the situation reveal itself exactly as it had been set in motion. Laura's eyes flicked between me and the figures behind her, calculating, trying to understand, trying to regain footing on ground that had suddenly shifted under her. And for the first time since this started, She did not speak immediately, because somewhere between the sound of that first engine and the quiet arrival behind her, the certainty she had been standing on was beginning to crack. Laura took a small step back without realizing it, the kind of movement that happens when the ground beneath you no longer feels as solid as it did a moment ago, and her eyes shifted again, this time not just toward the vehicles at the curb, but toward the people standing beside them, taking in the details she had ignored before, the posture, the stillness, the lack of any visible urgency, because real authority does not rush. It arrives and lets everything else slow down around it. The man closest to the driveway stepped forward just enough to be seen clearly, his presence calm, measured, his eyes scanning the scene once, not lingering, not reacting, just processing. And when he spoke again, his voice carried that same controlled tone. "We received a call regarding this vehicle." And even though the words were simple, the weight behind them was not, because they were not a question, they were a statement of involvement. Laura straightened her shoulders, drawing herself up again, trying to reclaim the space she had owned just minutes earlier. "Yes," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "This is a community enforcement matter. The vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations and is being removed accordingly." And she gestured toward the Jeep like that explanation should settle everything. Like rules written on paper somewhere in a binder could override whatever had just stepped onto the street. The man listened without interrupting, his expression neutral, giving her just enough time to finish before his gaze shifted past her to me, not asking for permission, not needing clarification, just confirming something silently. And I gave the smallest nod in return, barely a movement, but enough. The tow driver had fully stepped away now, his hands clear, his body angled slightly away from the Jeep, as if distancing himself from the entire situation, and I could see the calculation in his face, the quiet realization that this was no longer a standard tow, that something had changed in a way that paperwork could not fix. Laura noticed it too, her eyes snapping toward him, irritation flashing across her face. "Why are you stopping? Finish the job," she said, sharper now, the edge in her voice no longer hidden, and he hesitated, looking between her and the man at the edge of the driveway, then finally shaking his head just once, slow, uncertain. "Ma'am, I think I need to wait," he replied, and that was the first moment her control truly slipped. Not completely, but enough to show. The air felt tighter now, like everything was holding its breath, and I let my gaze drift back to the Jeep, to the cable that had not moved, to the chain still lying on the ground, every piece of the scene locked in place like evidence waiting to be acknowledged, and I could feel Laura watching me again, searching for answers she had already missed. The man stepped forward one more pace, stopping just short of the driveway line, his attention shifting to the vehicle itself, taking in the details that Laura had overlooked completely. And when he spoke again, his tone did not change, but the words did. "This vehicle is not subject to HOA enforcement," he said, simple, direct, leaving no room for interpretation, and Laura blinked, the statement landing harder than anything that had been said so far, because it was not an argument, it was a boundary. "That is not possible," she replied immediately, but the certainty was gone now, replaced by something thinner, something defensive. "Everything in this community falls under HOA jurisdiction," and the man paused for just a fraction of a second before responding, his eyes steady, his voice unchanged. "Not this." And the silence that followed felt heavier than anything else that had happened so far, because for the first time, Laura Whitmore had no rule to fall back on. Laura's lips parted slightly as if she was about to argue again, but nothing came out right away, and that hesitation was louder than anything she had said before, because it meant she was thinking now instead of reacting, trying to find the rule, the clause, the authority she could lean on. But there was nothing in her usual playbook that covered what was standing in front of her. The man at the edge of the driveway did not move closer, did not raise his voice, did not need to do anything dramatic. He simply reached into his jacket and held up a badge just long enough for it to be seen clearly, the metal catching the sunlight for a brief second before it disappeared again, and that small gesture shifted everything in a way no argument ever could. The air felt still, almost too still, like the entire street had paused to listen, and I could hear the faint ticking of the tow truck engine cooling down, the soft creak of metal settling as the driver stepped another inch back, putting more distance between himself and the Jeep without being told. Laura blinked once, then again, her eyes tracking the badge, then the man, then me, and back again, the calculation in her expression turning into something sharper, something closer to realization, but not fully there yet, not until she heard the words that followed. This vehicle is part of an active task force operation. The man said, calm, precise, every word placed exactly where it needed to be, and any unauthorized interference with it is taken seriously. And he let that statement settle without adding anything extra, because he did not need to. The weight of it was already enough. Laura straightened again, almost instinctively, like she could push back against the shift just by holding her posture. I was not interfering, she said, her voice controlled but thinner now. I was enforcing community regulations. This vehicle was in violation, and she gestured again, but the movement lacked the confidence it had before, like she was repeating something she no longer fully believed. I watched her for a second, then looked down at the broken lock in my hand, turning it slowly between my fingers, the clean cut still catching the light. And I spoke for the first time since the others arrived, my voice even, steady, carrying just enough to be heard without effort. You cut a secured chain and authorized a tow, I said, not accusing, not emotional, just stating the sequence as it happened, because facts do not need emphasis when they are clear. The tow driver shifted again, clearing his throat quietly. Sir, I did not know, he said, his tone careful, directed toward the man with the badge. And the response came just as calmly. That is why you stopped. And there was no blame in it, just acknowledgement, which somehow made it land even harder. Laura's gaze snapped back to me, searching, trying to find something in my expression she could use, something she could challenge, but I gave her the same calm look as before, no anger, no satisfaction, just certainty. And that was what unsettled her most, because there was nothing to push against. A light breeze moved through the street, barely enough to stir the leaves on the trees, carrying with it the faint smell of warm asphalt and cut grass. And for a moment, everything felt almost normal again, except for the quiet presence behind her and the reality settling in piece by piece. The man shifted his attention back to her, his tone unchanged. Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle, he said, not as a request, but not aggressively either, just a clear boundary. And Laura hesitated, just long enough to show that she was no longer in control of what happened next, her eyes flicking once more toward the Jeep, toward the cable, toward the lock in my hand, and finally back to the man in front of her, as the situation she had created continued to move forward without her. Laura did not move right away, and that hesitation stretched longer than it should have, long enough for everyone standing there to notice, long enough for the balance of control to fully shift away from her without a single raised voice. Her eyes lingered on the Jeep one more time, then dropped briefly to the chain on the ground, and I could almost see the moment it connected in her mind, the sequence replaying itself in reverse. The decision to cut the lock, the order to tow, the certainty she had felt just minutes ago now unraveling piece by piece. She took a slow step back, not dramatic, not forced, just enough to comply without admitting it outright, and the man with the badge acknowledged it with a slight nod. Nothing more, because compliance did not need to be announced, it only needed to happen. The tow driver exhaled quietly, a sound he probably did not realize he was holding in, and began to unhook the cable with careful, deliberate movements, the metal clinking softly as it loosened from the frame of the Jeep, each small sound carrying clearly in the quiet air like a reset of everything that had just gone wrong. Laura's voice came again, but it was different now, still controlled, still trying to hold on to something. There must be some kind of misunderstanding, she said, her tone measured, searching for footing, and the man responded without looking at her directly, his attention still on the vehicle. There is not, he said simply, and that was the second time her words had met a wall that did not move. I watched the tow cable fall away completely, the tension gone, the Jeep settling back into stillness as if nothing had ever touched it, and I felt the weight of the lock in my hand again, that small piece of metal that had started all of this, still warm from the sun, still cleanly cut, still undeniable. Laura turned toward me then, fully this time, and for a brief moment the composure slipped just enough to show what was underneath. Not anger, not yet, but something closer to disbelief. Like she was trying to reconcile the version of events she had expected with the one unfolding in front of her. "You knew about this," she said. Not quite a question, more like an accusation searching for confirmation, and I met her gaze without hesitation, my expression unchanged. "I knew you were making a mistake," I replied, keeping my voice level, because anything more would have been unnecessary. The breeze picked up slightly, rustling the leaves along the sidewalk, carrying with it the faint hum of distant traffic beyond the neighborhood. A reminder that the world outside this street was still moving exactly as it should, even if everything here had just shifted. The man stepped closer to the Jeep now, not touching it, just observing, his eyes scanning the details with a familiarity that Laura could not match. And then he spoke again, this time with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "This vehicle is registered under a joint task force authorization," he said, each word steady, "and it is currently assigned to an active case." And he paused just long enough for that to settle before adding, "which means it is protected under federal jurisdiction." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything that had been said so far, and I watched Laura's reaction closely, the way her shoulders tightened slightly, the way her gaze flickered again toward the Jeep, then back to the man, and finally to me, as the full weight of what she had done began to take shape, not all at once, but enough to change everything. Behind her, the unmarked vehicles remained still, quiet, their presence steady and unyielding, and in that moment, the neighborhood that had once felt like her domain no longer belonged to her at all. Laura's composure did not shatter all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a thread being pulled loose from something that used to feel solid, and I could see it in the way she held herself, still upright, still trying to maintain that familiar posture of control, but no longer anchored to anything real. Her eyes moved again, scanning the scene as if she could find a version of it that made sense to her. The Jeep, the men standing quietly behind her, the tow driver now fully disengaged, the cable coiled loosely on the ground, and me, standing exactly where I had been from the start, unchanged, unaffected, like I had been waiting for this exact moment all along. "This is not reasonable," she said finally, her voice steady but lacking the weight it had carried before. "You cannot expect me to know that." And the man with the badge turned his attention fully to her now, not confrontational, not aggressive, just direct. "You are expected to not interfere with property you do not have authority over," he replied, his tone even, each word placed carefully, "especially when that property is secured and not abandoned." And the subtle emphasis on that last word landed harder than anything else, because it pointed directly at the decision she had made without saying it outright. Laura opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, her gaze shifting briefly toward the chain in my hand, then away, like she could not quite bring herself to acknowledge it directly. The breeze carried a faint rustle through the trees again, and somewhere nearby a garage door opened, the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood continuing without interruption, completely unaware of the shift that had just taken place at the center of it. The man stepped forward one more pace, stopping at the edge of the driveway, his presence calm but undeniable, and his voice did not change when he spoke again. "We are going to need a statement regarding your actions this morning," he said, and there was no accusation in it, just procedure, just the next step in something that had already been set in motion. Laura blinked, slower this time, her confidence no longer snapping back into place. "A statement?" she repeated, as if the word itself had caught her off guard, and the man nodded once. "Yes, regarding the unauthorized access, the removal attempt, and the damage to the securing mechanism." And that last phrase hung in the air for a second, formal, precise, impossible to ignore. I shifted the broken lock slightly in my hand, the metal catching the light again, and for a moment I could feel her attention drawn to it whether she wanted it or not, because it was simple, undeniable, a single action that had triggered everything that followed. The tow driver stood off, to the side now, completely still, watching, not involved anymore, but not leaving either, like he understood that walking away too quickly would not be the right move. Laura's shoulders lowered just a fraction, not enough to be obvious, but enough to show that something inside her had changed, the certainty replaced by something quieter, something more cautious, and she looked at the man, then at me, then back at the Jeep, as if trying to find a version of events that gave her back control, but there was none. I let the silence sit for a moment longer before speaking again, my voice calm, measured, carrying no emotion beyond the simple truth of it. You treated it like it was yours to manage, I said, not accusing, just stating what had happened, and her eyes snapped back to mine, searching for something to push against, something to argue, but there was nothing there for her to use. The man beside her did not react to my words, did not need to, because the situation had already moved, past argument, past interpretation, into something much more defined. And as the morning sun climbed higher, casting sharper shadows across the driveway, it became clear to everyone standing there that this was no longer about rules on paper or neighborhood authority. It was about a line that had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. The statement hung there between them, simple and unavoidable, and for a moment no one moved, not because they did not know what to do, but because everything that needed to happen next was already decided, already set in motion by a single action that could not be taken back. Laura's gaze dropped again, slower this time, settling on the chain in my hand, as if she was finally seeing it clearly for what it was, not just a piece of metal, not just a lock, but the exact point where control had shifted away from her and into something she could not override. And when she looked back up, the certainty that had defined her from the beginning was gone, replaced by something quieter, something more measured. I was enforcing the rules, she said, but the words lacked force now, more explanation than authority, and the man beside her did not respond right away, giving the silence just enough space to settle before answering. There are limits to those rules, he said calmly, and you crossed one of them. And there was no judgment in his tone, no escalation, just a clear line drawn where there had not been one before. The tow driver shifted his weight again, glancing briefly at the Jeep, then at the men behind Laura, then back at the ground, as if committing the entire moment to memory, the kind of situation you do not forget once you realize what you almost became part of. I let my hand lower slightly, the broken lock resting against my palm, its weight familiar now, and I stepped forward just enough for the light to fully reach it. The clean cut visible from where she stood, undeniable, final, and I watched her eyes follow the movement, not out of curiosity anymore, but recognition. The man spoke again, his voice steady, procedural. We will document what happened here this morning, he said, and you will have the opportunity to provide your account. And Laura nodded once, slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding, because at this point agreement did not matter, only acknowledgement. The unmarked vehicles remained where they were. Engines quiet, presence constant, not intrusive, just there, like a boundary that had been established without needing to be announced. And the neighborhood around us continued as it always did, distant sounds of daily life carrying on without interruption, a reminder that most people would never see moments like this unfold. I glanced back at the Jeep, still exactly where it had been from the start, untouched now, the cable removed, the tension gone, and for a second everything felt still. Again, like the moment had reached its natural end. Laura looked at me one last time, searching for something, maybe an explanation, maybe a reaction, but I gave her the same calm expression I had held from the beginning, because there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to argue, only the result of what had already been done. I turned the lock once more in my hand, then lowered it to my side, my voice quiet, even, carrying just enough to close the space between us. It was never about the Jeep, I said, letting the words settle without emphasis, because the truth did not need it. And her eyes held mine for a second longer before she looked away. Behind her, the men began moving with quiet efficiency, not rushed, not dramatic, just following through on what had already been set into motion. And as the morning light sharpened across the driveway, casting clean lines over the pavement, it became clear that nothing about this moment had been loud or chaotic, and yet everything had changed. I took one last look at the chain, the driveway, the Jeep, every detail exactly where it belonged, and then shifted my weight back, the gravel crunching softly under my boots, the sound small but final, as the silence settled in again, steady and complete, the kind of silence that does not ask for attention because it already has it.